Well, as we promised in our last video, we're back here at the Museum of Drag Racing with Big Daddy Don Garlit. And Big Daddy, this time you're going to give us a personally guided tour.
Well, that's right, Vic. You know, a lot of people come to the museum and they see this early Ford collection and they say, Big Daddy, why have you got so many early Fords in the drag racing museum? Drag racing started out with early Fords and Flathead V8s, and we had everything for these engines, every piece of speed equipment that you could possibly imagine. In fact, there were some of us that felt like the Flathead would never be outrun by the overheads. You know, they had that Mickey Mouse valve train, and there wasn't any speed equipment available for them, and we thought that little Flathead engine would always be the king. So today we're going to take you on a tour and show you some of the earliest Flathead race cars, some early Fords that are very unusual, and give you a little insight into where drag racing started from with the Flathead V8. In fact, I am standing in front of a Flathead V8 that's kind of unusual. This is a little 36 Ford. It's been channeled down over the frame 6 inches. It's got a full race Flathead engine in it. Now this car was the first car that my wife and I built just for drag racing. Of course, it doubled as my second car. I had to get back and forth to work in it, so I had to have brakes and necessary safety equipment. But this thing had a really tough engine, and it would run the quarter in an astounding 15 seconds flat. Well, that's a far cry from the speeds of today, but that was really the hot setup in 1953. This engine was originally a 1950 Ford. We liked those blocks back in those days because they were stout. It's got everything that you could do to a Flathead. It's got the 3 deuces on the sharp triple manifold. It's got the Edelbrock high compression cylinder heads, which gave the engine about a 10-to-1 compression ratio. And it's got a Smith & Jones mushroom lifter cam. That's 16 special mushroom lifters, which allows the engine to have extremely high lift and fast action. That gave you torque and good high-speed performance. Another special feature on this engine was the converted Lincoln Zephyr V12 distributor. We took the cam out of the distributor, put a Ford cam in that had 8 lobes, and ground off every other lobe. So one side of the coil fired 4 cylinders and the other side fired the other 4. This gave us at least 6,500 to 7,000 RPM range. Also, this car to drag race had to have a real low speed rear, like a 940 ring and pinion, which was 444 to 1. So we used the Columbia overdrive for the highway speeds, and you'll see the Columbia switch that come out of a 40 Ford, and that directs the vacuum to the rear end, which shifts it to high or low. In the transmission is a 39 Ford with the Lincoln Zephyr 25-tooth gears. So this gave you everything that was the hot rodder's dream back in 1953. And of course the car has the 39 Ford hydraulic brakes on it. Vic, what do you say we take a little ride in this thing and I'll show you what it's all about? Our museum is the Early Ford Foundation's Museum East, which means we have a lot of the early Fords from 1932 to 1953 right here on the grounds. Their other museum is in Sacramento, California. And as you enter this museum, one of the first cars that you will see is this very nice restored 1932 Ford 3-window coupe. Now, I purchased this car from an elderly lady in Philadelphia a number of years ago, and it has 0 rust because she didn't like the snow and she never drove it outdoors in the winter time. So consequently, we have a very nice car here that no rust, no patch panels have been put in it, and it has been restored back to just exactly the way Henry built it. Correct distributor, correct heads, correct water pumps, correct carburetor, correct fuel pump, and it was a pleasure doing it. LeBaron Bonney did the interior for us and has painted a beautiful black. So I think it's a very enjoyable car. And of course it represents that era, you know, when we got these cars off the street back in the 50s and the late 40s and got them for like 50 bucks from these people. Cut them up, made hot rods out of them, channeled them, chopped them, put souped up motors in them, pulled the fenders off of them, just literally ruined them. So in my old age, I come here and I do some of these cars as kind of a penance, you know, for the destruction that I did to them when they were on the streets. So this is one for future generations to enjoy, and I hope you enjoy it. One of the most popular hot rods of all time was the 32 Ford Roadster. And the reason was it channeled so nicely, it was easy to chop the windshield stanchions, and the fenders came off, and it made a true hot rod, and it was lightweight. And that's what won races back there in the early days. But this was a rare car. Even when I was a hot rodder in the 50, 51, 52, 53, you couldn't hardly find these cars. They had already been all gathered up by the older guys, and they were using them for their racing purposes. And usually they won at the drags. That's why I ended up with the 36 Ford, because I couldn't find a 32 Ford Roadster in 1953. But these cars were very popular. Now this particular one is a very nice, restored back to original. It came from Alabama. 1974 it won a Hershey first place for the Antique Automobile Club of America. And it's black and it is pristine. And we really love it. It's got all of the whistles and bells that make it the correct 32. If you were an affluent hot rodder in the early 50s, you might have had a car like this, a 1935 Ford Roadster, another rare car. By the time you got to about 1955, you couldn't find these cars anymore. This particular one has the hot rod engine just the way the guys would have done it in those days. Big Merc, 4-inch crank, full race cam, 3 carburetors. Of course, this car, it also has a Columbia overdrive for the high-speed work on the highways. Guys like to go fast once in a while, really fast, and the Columbia was one way to do it. Of course, they broke a lot of them. They weren't as strong as they are today with the new modifications that we make to them. But this car has got all of the accessories that Ford offered. It's got the Greyhound, it's got the special bumper guards, and it also has the General Jumbo wheels, which are very hard to find. It was purchased by the museum quite a number of years ago. We bought the gentleman's wife a brand new Oldsmobile to the tune of about $18,000, and he gave us the car. And we're very proud of it, and we think it adds a lot to the collection. Another exhibit in the museum that I'd like to bring your attention to is this winterized 1936 Ford. We have attempted to show the people what it was like for a winter in an early Ford, or in any early car for that matter. It was a little different than it is today. First thing that you better have is a set of tire chains for the rear of your car, because there weren't many snow tires available, and the roads didn't have the salt and the different things done to them that they have today, and you needed chains. Another thing that we'll see on this Ford is this winterized front. This Pines grill, they called it, covered up the radiator, and you had these 2 little doors that opened and shut to let more or less air into the radiator, so the radiator wouldn't freeze up. These cars ran in cold enough weather that it would actually freeze the radiator. Then naturally you had to have your antifreeze. That was necessary to keep the temperature very low for the freezing point of the coolant. Then another couple of really interesting items I'd like to bring your attention to. Here is a foot warmer. You pull this little door out here, you could put hot coals out of your stove in that, and you carry that out to the car, and the ladies could put their feet on it. Now, if you were brave, here was something that Allstate, Sears offered. This is a little kerosene heater. This tank fills up with kerosene. You take this top off, turn it upside down, wet the wick, stick a match in the hole over here, light it. This whole top glows red. You set that right on the floorboards of your car. Now, if it was a little bit too hot, you could drop this down on, and that cooled it off. And to shut it off, you turned it and dropped it down. Hoped it didn't blow up. Imagine a few of them did. Also, an important thing in winterizing your car was the battery. You always went before the first really cold days and had the battery checked, and they had big machines in those days to do that, because if you had a bad battery on the first cold day, you hit the starter button, it just went, and that was it. So batteries, chains, antifreeze, some type of protection for the radiator, these are the things that were necessary to see to it that you didn't get stalled during the very cold months that they used to have up north, and still do for that matter. Now, opposite of the winter was the summer, and especially summer when you were driving through the desert. You had to be prepared for that. And one of the things that you would not go without is this desert water bag, which hangs on the front bumper of your car. You fill it up with water, it gets damp, and the Latent heat of evaporation cools the water, and you have cool drinking water while going through the desert. What about air conditioning? They sold a unit that worked exactly the same way. It hung on the window of your car. You pulled a little string, and this roller went through the water that was in the bottom of a trough, and the air went through the water, cooled it, and you had air conditioning. We've come a long way, baby. I'd like to bring your attention to this little cutaway engine here. This was a 1934 Ford V8 that was cut away by Ford, probably for the factory for training sessions for the see, they hired a lot of people that had never seen an engine, didn't know anything about cars, and Ford was good about cutting away. I saw a chassis one time cut away over at the big casino in Las Vegas. They had one, but this is an engine that was cut away. You can see the pistons, the valves, the clutch, the distributor, the generator. Everything is where you can look inside and see what makes it tick. Well, they discarded it, you know, after they were through with it, and somehow or another it ended up in the Harris collection, and I bought it when they were selling a lot of the stuff when they were breaking up the big Harris collection in Reno. People really enjoy these engines that are cut away because, believe it or not, most people don't know what's inside of an internal combustion engine. This gives them a little peek. A 37 Ford Coupe with a 60 horsepower engine. Now, this car belonged to an elderly lady, and she was living in Atlanta when we got the car from her. It's got very few miles on it. It has been restored slightly in that it's been painted and a little work done to it, but basically it's an original car. Now, this is a rare car, not rare in the fact that there were few produced. A lot of these 37 Coupes were produced. Very few exist today. The reason? The stock car racers loved 37 Fords because they had lightweight sheet metal and lightweight frames. And if you were running in a class in the little quarter-mile round tracks, and you were in that class that had to have only one 2-barrel carburetor and stock heads, you wanted a 37 Ford. Well, my brother and I, when we had our shop in Nebraska Avenue down in Tampa, Florida in the 50s, we do at least one a week. We just go into town somewhere, see one sitting on a corner somewhere for 50 bucks, buy it from the old couple, take it out to the shop, bob the fenders, put roll bars in it, take the old 37 Ford motor out of it. We usually sold it to the guys without an engine. They put their own engines in them. I don't know how many we destroyed, so imagine how many of these things were being destroyed all over the United States at the same time, because that lightweight was the answer to how to get around those quarter miles. There's another interesting feature on this car. This car has that special front license plate that takes you across the Jacksonville-Duval Bridge. In other words, this car had a special pass to go through without paying the toll, and we have the plate on the car. So it's a very nice car, 60 horsepower. You couldn't hardly get up a hill without going into second gear, but a very rare little car, very nice for the collection. But now I'm going to show you a much rarer 37 Ford. This happens to be a 37 Ford Roadster. Now, they only produced 1,250 of these cars. Less than 5 exist today. And the reason is, again, racing. Out in California, they were having Roadster races with stock engines and 2-barrel carburetors. Again, the lightweight Roadster was the way to go because it outran the 36s. So most of them have disappeared from the scene. And of course, a few, the tops rotted out and the rain came in and rotted them out. They carried them off to the iron yard. But this little car was taken apart in 1952 in Upper New York State by an elderly gentleman. He was going to restore it. He never got it finished. He gave it to his son. His son had it for many years, and finally in the V8 Times I saw the little ad, 37 Ford Roadster, a real one. There's been a lot of fake ones made. They take cabriolets and change them over, but I can show you how to tell the difference. And he never got around to restoring it. We bought it, took it completely down to the frame, put it back to like it is stock. Now, this car is very unusual. Not only unusual that it's a 37 Ford Roadster and it's real, but it has a factory rear tire spare kit. This car has the spare tire on the outside from the factory. The cast iron mount that the tire bolts to, that bolts to the body, has got a 78 prefix, which indicates it is a 37 Ford part number. And it has the special bumper irons that extend the bumper just far enough to allow the spare tire to fit. I've never seen another 37 Ford like it. But you know, old Henry was like that. He would use up the parts from the previous year. He didn't waste a nickel. Remember the old story about ordering the floorboards of special size crates, and then that became the floorboards of the Model Ts? Well, that's a true story. Another accessory on this car is the locking hood latch. There's a little key set goes right in here, and you can lock this latch, keep people from going into your hood. That was something very early. You know, the early cars, nobody had locking hoods. And it's got the radio, and it also has the LeBaron Bonney leather interior. So very nice car, and I think you'll enjoy looking it over a little bit closer. This is probably one of the nicest 39 Ford coupes in the world, and we came upon it quite by accident. 4 or 5 years ago, we were having a show here on the grounds, and I was out showing off my 39 Ford with the Chrysler Hemi in it. I was polishing it, and this elderly gentleman walked up to him and he says, "I got one just like it." He says, "Well, not quite just like it." He says, "But it's a 39. He says, "And I want to sell it." I said, "Where is it?" He says, "Over in the parking lot." I said, "Why don't you have it in the show?" He said, "Well, it's not good enough to show." He says, "But it is a real nice car." He says, "Would you be interested in buying it?" I said, "Sure." So I walked over and took a look at it. First thing I do on these Fords is I drop down on the ground in the back under the trunk and see how bad they're rusted out under that deck lid. There wasn't even one tiny little hole in this thing. I said, So then I checked the quarter panels. No rust in the quarter panels, and it had the original black paint on it with some spots of primer in different places where the paint had worn thin. I told the guy, I said, "How much you want for it?" He says, "I want $4,200. I said, "You got it." Took him over to the shop, cut him a check, we owned it. We took this thing apart, and I'll tell you, it was unbelievable. There was not one rust hole anywhere. Had a few dents, but that's no problem. We just hammered those out, shrunk the metal, filed them, picked and filed them, made it really nice. Took it completely down to the frame, everything, last bolt and nut, and I'll tell you something interesting. It came out of Miami. The man that came from the Ocala Forest that sold it to us, he wasn't the original owner, but he had bought it from this elderly gentleman in Miami. And they had kept this car in a tin shed by their house its entire life. And it got so hot in that shed that the motor mounts and the body mounts were melted down over the frame. I have never seen anything like it. And I guess that's why it didn't rust, because anytime they drove in this shed, it just dried it right out. So it never had an opportunity for water to stay any length of time on the floorboards, you know, because these windshields always leaked, and so did the cowl vents. And so the water went in, got under the floor mats, rusted right through the floor, and ruined your car. This car never suffered any of that kind of damage. We had a grand time, Alan Parker and myself, working on it. You know, when you find something that's original like that and it's nice and you got all that metal to work with, it is a pleasure. What we decided upon is Coach Maroon, even though the car was originally black, because I got so many black cars I didn't need another black one. And I love this Coach Maroon. And years ago, it had a 39 Ford that was Coach Maroon original, but the drip rails were rusted out on it. If you remember, if you know your 39 Ford coupes, you'll know that the drip rail on the driver's side was prone to rusting out. And mine was, naturally, my original one. And this one wasn't. So we painted it Coach Maroon. We took the little 85 horse engine that was in it, and we went through it, put new sleeves in it. It's a steel sleeve engine, and you put those little thin sleeves in, you get brand new rings, and it was just like new. It's been restored with the stock solid lifters, and it has the Columbia overdrive, because we like that overdrive for the highway use. Got twin fogs and the 39 Ford accessory grill overrider, and it is also trimmed out in the salesman interior. That means it's got the Naugahyde headliner and package tray with the leather seats. You could order them that way. Later I'll show you a 40 that was ordered that way. This way the salesman didn't have problems with the mohair wearing out. And it's got the white sidewall tires and the spider hubcaps. Very nice car. We're in love with it, and I hope you'll enjoy it too. I love this truck. Why? Because when I was 12 years old, it was a 37 Ford truck just like this that my stepdad let me get behind the wheel of on the dairy and learn how to drive. By 14, I was able to drive it well, and I got my restricted license, and at 16, I became a full-fledged driver. all in a little 37 Ford truck just like this. And it's really, I messed with the engine, I fooled with it, I adjusted the brakes. This type of vehicle is what I had that I cut my teeth on, and I'll always love them. So in 1978, I was down in Tampa at the time. This old gentleman called me up from Ocala. He's on a horse farm. He says, I've got a 37 Ford truck that you ought to have. He says, I know you like early Fords. He says, I've got one that drives nice. I said, yeah, I might be interested. He said, I'm going to put it on a trailer and bring it down there. He says, I know you're going to want this truck. Pulled into my driveway a couple of days later, and he was right. I wanted this truck. It did drive nice. And I drove it for about 4 years, back and forth between High Performance World and Seffner, going to work every day. And finally, one day, I let my young daughter get in it, and she learned to drive in it. And then the first thing you know, she ran into a tree with it. Well, it just banged up the fender and a light. But it was my excuse to take the old truck all apart and completely do a frame-off restoration. And we did. It had a 100-horse engine in it when I started the restoration, but we have put it back with the 21-stud, 85-horse. It's just like it was. Now, this truck has never been started. We put it completely together. It's brand new, brakes, everything. It's never been run. We're going to leave it that way because I got enough of them to drive every day. We're going to save this one for posterity. We're now in the 40 Ford section of the museum, and this is really hits a soft spot in my heart. And the reason for that is my very first car in 1949 that I personally owned and bought was a 40 Ford two-door sedan, which I have one today, which is very nice, and my wife and I drive it to church every Sunday. But in this area right here, we have several 40 Fords, a black 40 Ford, very low mileage, a green 40 Ford convertible, and a gray 40 Ford coupe, and of course behind me a 40 Ford street rod. Each one of these cars is unique and has a little special story, and I'd like to start with this 1940 Ford black coupe. 30,000 original miles, no paint, no repaint, no engine work, nothing. It's got new tires on it. Naturally, the tires, original tires were wore out. But this belonged to an elderly lady that was a school teacher from Nebraska. And she owned it from the time it was new. She didn't like to drive it to school because she was afraid the kids were going to nick it or hit it with a ball or something. So she walked to school, which was probably only about a half a mile. She did say that once she drove it to Denver to visit her sister. But this car had very few miles put on it, and finally in the 60s it was sold to a friend of mine in South Dakota who kept it for a number of years, and then had a child, was going to go to college, and he needed some money, and so he sold it to the museum. But we're very proud of it. We don't do anything to it. It's just like Henry built it. Over here we have a 40 convertible that's very unusual. It was bought new by a doctor in 1940. He used it to make house calls. His wife would go with him and help him find the house numbers. They never had any children. They traveled all over the United States with this car, and also into Canada and Mexico. I have pictures in the trunk showing the different going across the state lines. He ordered this car with a couple of accessories that are very unusual: a Columbia overdrive and a factory dual exhaust. It has a very unusual left-hand exhaust manifold to accommodate that dual exhaust system. Also very unusual on this car is a factory tachometer drive off the generator to tell him when to shift in and out of the Columbia overdrive. The car was originally this Yosemite green, or cloud mist gray, I think they call this, but you know, that's green to me. But it's a very beautiful car. It's not been restored. It's had a top put on it, the interior has been done, and it has been painted. But the engine compartment, the engine is all completely original. It runs like a top, and we think it's a very nice car. In fact, we bought this car quite by accident. We had went up to New York State to buy a 39 Ford convertible. My wife and I drove all the way up. The car was terrible. We're on our way back, coming through Virginia, and we stopped at this man's collection. His name was Mr. Black, and he said, I want to sell this car. I took one look at it. I said, this car is for me. Now, we've done nothing to this car. This is the way we purchased it many years ago. Just recently, Mr. Black came through the museum and was admiring his old car. In fact, he wanted to buy it back. I told him it wasn't for sale. But it's a very nice 40. Just on the other side of this 40 convertible is one of the most sought after 40 coupes in the world. It's known as the Winfield Coupe. They call it the Winfield Coupe, but actually it should be the Montgomery Ward Coupe, because Montgomery Ward bought this car for his daughter Margaret in February of 1940. This car was sitting on a turntable at the San Francisco Exposition with the spotlight shining on it, and it was a beautiful, you know, that folkestone gray just shined like a diamond. It was on its way to South America for a South American diplomat, and it has the salesman interior that's all leatherette and leather, so that the you know, it takes wear, and also the moths won't eat it, and that's the reason they were building this car and sending it to South America for the diplomat. Well, Margaret Ward saw it and she wanted this car. Well, her dad, Montgomery, had so much clout with Ford Motor, he got the car for his daughter. Now, Margaret drove this car 27,000 miles. She never owned another car. When she died, she was still the owner of it. I came to know the car in the 60s. When I was traveling to San Francisco with my racing operation, I would stop in at Ed Winfield's to get advice. Ed was a master cam grinder. He was a genius in internal combustion engine. In fact, he designed the Winfield carburetor. And I would ask Ed questions about how to make my Chrysler Hemi run good or what kind of cam I should put in it, and he would always advise me. He liked to help the youngsters, and he helped a lot of them. He helped Eskandarian, he helped Bruce Crowder, he helped all the cam grinders get started. He was a really great guy. Anyway, his wife passed away, and Ed had the car. I had tried to buy the car several times. He never would sell it to me. But he was good friends with Kong Jackson, the guy that built the ignitions. And Kong Jackson got Ed to sell him the car. And he sold it to a collector back east. And on my way to see the 36 Ford that you saw in the winterizing part of the program, I was in this guy's garage, and here sat this gray coupe. And I said to Chris Carrier, who had told me about the 36, I said, "What is this car? It looks familiar to me." He says, "Oh, that's the Winfield Coupe." I said, "It certainly is. Do you want to sell it?" And he says, "Yes, I do." So I asked him how much he wanted for it. He said, "Well, I gave $18,000 for it." And I thought, that's really too high. He said, "But I'll take 15. And I looked at it and I thought, gosh, I was just in the process of buying this 36, and I really didn't have that much. I offered him $13,500. And you know what? He took it. It was one of the best deals I ever made. I was offered by Bruce Crowder $25,000 for it because he was such good friends with Winfield, and Bruce Crowder likes old cars too. But I think it belongs right here in the museum for people to enjoy. 27,000 original miles. It's had a couple of the fenders painted because the garage that Margaret kept it in San Francisco had a very narrow door, and so she scraped both the right front and the right rear fender. They've both been repainted. There's a couple of little chips here and there, but after all, it's a 40 Ford, and it was used for daily transportation for a number of years. One final little story that goes with it. After I got the car personally in my possession, I got on the phone and I called up Ed, and I said, "Ed," I said, "has this car really got 27,000 miles on it?" He says, "No," he says, "it might have 400 or 500 more." He says, "the speedometer was broken for a little while, and we had a time getting a speedometer cable for it." He says, "So it's probably got about 200 or 300 miles more than that on it." I says, "Does it have a Winfield cam in it?" "No." He says, "Margaret never wanted one of my camshafts." I says, "Oh, that's too bad. It'd be nice if it had a Winfield 3/4 cam in it." I said, "Well, you'll be happy to know that it's here in the museum." He says, "They didn't put a small block Chevy in it, did they, Big?" I said, "No, it's still got the original Flathead Ford engine." He said, "Well, Margaret will be glad to hear that." I said, "Margaret will be glad to hear that?" He says, "Yes, I talk to her every night." In 1950, Ford wanted to beef up its lagging sales of the 50 Ford, so they introduced the Crestliner. This was a dolled-up car. They'd kind of taken a survey of what people liked, you know, extra chrome, two-tone paint, special seat covers, special headliners, special hubcaps, stuff like that. Anyway, the package was around $500 extra. Well, they built 22,000 of them in 1950, and they sold pretty well, but you know, that's a lot of money extra just to have your car dolled up. Most people bought cars, Fords especially in the 50s, they bought them for transportation of their family. They weren't so much for dollop. You bought a convertible if you wanted something dolled up. But the Crestliner kit was not available on the convertible. It was just on the two-door sedan, and also included a vinyl top, one of the first vinyl tops in the business. Then in 1951, they came back again with the Crestliner, but sales really began to fall off when Chevrolet introduced the Bel Air hardtop. And of course, Ford had to counter immediately with the Ford Victoria. And they stopped production of the Crestliner in 51 with only 9,000 units produced. So the 51 is much more rare and sought after than the 50. The two that we have in the museum, the 1950 I found in Santa Ana, California. It was owned by an elderly lady who had bought it brand new, and she had put shoe polish on the top all these years. Hence the cords were not rotted out, and it does have the original top. It also has the original interior, which we have covered with plastic seats. And I drove the car. A friend of mine picked it up in California, drove it to Denver. I met him in Denver at the races, the Mile High Nationals, and drove the car on home. And it developed a miss. When we got home, we took the cylinder heads off, and sure enough, there was a crack in one of the valve seats. So we had to repair that and rebuild the engine. Then it was really nice, and we drove it a lot and had a lot of fun with it. And then I ran into the 51 Ford Crestliner in Dallas, Texas. A friend of mine knew that I had the 50, said, you know, you really ought to have this 51. And I went down to Dallas, looked it over. It was a really nice car, gave him the money, and drove it home. These cars are really usable today. Anyone who really would like a stock Ford to drive on a daily basis, it would not beat the 4950 or 51, more commonly known as the shoebox Fords. But they had good brakes, had the good Bendix brakes on them. They had the V8 engine, had a lot of features that increased the ability to stay cool, and they had the automatic electric overdrive. Both of these cars have those features. They have both been driven many miles, and they're both fun cars. And I hope that you enjoy them when you come to the museum. You know, people are always asking me, what's your favorite car? What's the most valuable car in the collection? What's the rarest car? Well, let me tell you, this car just about fits all three descriptions. It's very rare. Probably less than 8 exist in the world today. It's worth a lot of money. We wouldn't take $75,000 for it. And it is a really smooth car and nice to drive. Since its restoration, my wife and I drove it over 1,000 miles around Ocala here. We hated to give it up, but we just didn't want any stone damage. It's a 1942 Mercury convertible. You know, it was produced just before December the 7th when World War II broke out, and production was stopped immediately, and Ford went to the production of war vehicles. And so we were fortunate enough to have this car produced before that happened. And the way we came into possession of this car was the phone rang one day, and it was this gentleman, Ernie Perez, down in Tampa. He had had a heart attack, and he had been restoring this car, and he just wasn't able to continue on, but he wanted it to go somewhere where it would be done right and would be seen by the general public. So he asked me, he says, do you know what a 42 Mercury convertible is? And I said, oh yeah, I know what it is. I said, I've never seen one, only in a picture, but I do know what they are. He says, well, I have one, and I'd like to sell it to you. I couldn't wait. I got right in my truck and trailer, went down to Tampa, loaded it up, brought it up here. Alan Parker and myself, we took it all apart, down to the bare frame. It had some rust in it, because, you know, most convertibles do. When the tops rot out, the water goes right in. But we were able, with the help of Wayman Brownlee in Atlanta, who supplied a lot of the parts, even the floor section he had for the trunk. And we got new old stock fenders in the floor section. It had the original engine in the engine compartment. One cylinder head was wrong. Because there's a different cylinder head on one side or the other on these engines. There's a right and a left, and when I was at Hershey one year, I found the correct head. But the engine is, you know, they only built it 1 year, the 29A. It's not a 59AB block, it's a 29A. It's got a relieved section between the valves and the cylinder. It is 3 3/16 by 3 3/4, makes it 239 cubic inches, and it produces a full 100 horsepower. It's got a Columbia overdrive in it for cruising on the old Interstate 75 out there. And what a scavenger hunt this was getting the parts. We went all over the United States, and with the help of a lot of my friends, which I mentioned, Wayman was one of them, we found the parts. The only piece that we never were able to find for this car is the factory turn signal kit. I'm still looking. We could put it in there if we found it. But this car has the provisions for that in the steering column, the places for it, but we do not have the kit. But it's got the heater, it's got the overdrive, and oh, the radio. I have to mention the radio. We found a radio at a swap meet for this car, and I took it to the antique radio shop in up in Largo, and they took it apart, and they said, "Big, you are so lucky. This radio is brand new. There was a little wire had come unsoldered evidently at the factory when they put it together. The radio never played. It had been taken out of a car, replaced with another radio. So all the mechanism for the Wonder Bar where you push it and find the stations, all that gears were brand new. It had never been used. He soldered up the little wire and cleaned the radio up, and it was perfect. It also has another unusual little accessory. It's a little vacuum whistle. When you pull the emergency brake and start the engine, it whistles at you if you don't release it. Hence, you don't burn up those rear brakes by driving around with that emergency brake pulled. The toughest piece to find on this car was the license plate bracket that says Mercury. Almost all these cars will have the 48 Ford piece that doesn't have any script at all on it. Finally, I found one. It was at Hershey. Wayman Brownlee found it. He shipped it to me. We had to have it restored because it had some potholes in it where it had rotted over the years. You know how bad that pot metal is. But Classic Chrome down in Largo were able to repair it for me, and we have that on the car. I've been threatened to take that off and have it cast in brass. I think quite a few of the Mercury lovers would like that. But it's a real nice car. Got the LeBaron Bonney red leather interior. They had some of the material like was supposed to go on the door panels, that basket weave, which is real important. It's painted a beautiful jet black, and I don't know what else can I say, but it's just a lovely driving car. It's lovely to look at, and it's lovely to drive. Now, before we end our tour here in the antique building, I'd like to call your attention to a really special car. This is a 1950 Mercury, and it's got the original Flathead Mercury in it, 255 cubic inches, and this was owned by a little old lady, and I mean literally a little old lady. She was just 4 foot something tall, and she was 90 years old and still driving this car. Well, finally she decided it was time to give up the old Merc, and we got it, and what a beautiful restoration it made. We actually didn't do a lot. We covered the seat covers with plastic. We put a paint job on the outside. Didn't even paint the door jambs. Dressed up the engine, took the accessories off and repainted them. And it is just beautiful. But you know, this Mercury was of no interest to me and people like me in the early 50s because this car was too heavy and too quiet and too smooth. But what we did like about this car was that big engine, that 4-inch crank. We took those things and made the hot rod motors. So now, let's go over to the Racing Car Museum and have a look at the race cars that were powered by these Flatheads, and almost every one of them had a 4-inch Mercury crank. By 1955, the Flathead engine had been developed to such a high state of technology that cars were running over 140 miles an hour in under 10 seconds in the quarter mile with these fabulous little engines. They had done everything to them. They were bored, they were stroked, they had 3, they had 4 carburetors, they had magnetos, they had everything that you could possibly imagine. And like I said earlier, a lot of us thought that the overhead would never outrun one of these engines. Now this little car that I'm sitting in right now, this is Mr. Bill Hewlett's car. He built this car not too many years ago. This man has never run anything but a Flathead engine. He was in the Flathead business when his daddy had his garage back in 1945, and today he still races Flatheads. Another car that we have in the museum is the silver dollar car. This was a car that raced in California from the late 50s clear into the 60s, winning races at Pomona, California as late as 1965, if you can believe that. I mean, these are the true die-hard Flatheads. Some of the other cars in the building that we will see on this tour is the Bean Bandits, which was over 140-mile-an-hour car. It's in another section of the museum. We also have the original dragster here, the Dick Kraft car, which is powered by a Flathead. And then you'll even see a car like Dean Moon's little Moonbeam car, which was a car that wasn't built for drag racing. It was built for the Salt Flats, and it also ran the trials at Brighton. It had a Flathead engine in it. So there were lots of Flathead things going on all the time. And as you move through the museum, you will see some of these things. We have a complete engine, a full race Flathead in the engine room, which has got everything on it you could possibly do to a Flathead. There's even a little 60 horsepower Flathead that's all hopped up that they used in the midget racers. They called those the Arkansas Flatheads. But to me, one of the most important Flathead engines that I ever owned was in my Roadster, and we'll go take a look at that now. You know, when I was a youngster, all the big-time racers, which were mostly round track guys, this was the shot they liked, because this indicated they were pulling away from their competitors and they were just looking back to see how far they were ahead. Well, you know, we didn't look back in drag racing all that much, but you know, I can remember in the old days when I was racing this car, this 27T with a Flathead engine, I used to look back at the competitors sometime, and even sometimes we'd reach back and give them a little wave, meaning, you know, goodbye, see you later. When I was real young, 18, 19 years old, racing around on the streets of Tampa, one of the fiercest competitors of the time was Charlie Hogan in his black 27T Roadster, powered by a Lincoln Flathead V12. Now that thing really had some torque, and I'll never forget the time that I saw him for the very first in an outing in Tampa, and I was riding with my buddy in his little 38 Ford coupe, which was powered by a Flathead with carbs and heads, and we saw this little Roadster at the stoplight at the next intersection ahead of us, and I said, "Grady, let's go up there and race that Roadster." But Grady recognized this guy, and he says, "No," he says, "that's King Hogan." Says, "We're not racing him, he'll outrun us." And Hogan was a fierce competitor, and it wasn't until 1954 in this little car right here that I finally did put a wheel out in front of him and won my first top eliminator trophy at Lake Wales, Florida. But in all of that time, I just have to tell you that the development of the Flathead was phenomenal. There was all types of equipment made for him, which I said earlier, but also there was an overhead valve kit made for him, which Arcus Duntov, the father of the Corvette, had designed back in the 40s for Ford trucks. This was a fabulous Hemi head, aluminum head kit that you could put on your Flathead, and it raised it from 100 horsepower to 175 horsepower. Not many of them ever got on the trucks. Most of them went right straight to California and Bell Auto Parts, and the guys took them to the races, the lakes, the salt flats, and the drag strips. Then another thing that was made for the Flatheads was McCullough made a centrifugal supercharger, which was purchased by Andy Granatelli, the Granker brothers, and they offered them on the Flathead engines, which raised the horsepower to about the same level, depending on the actual dress of the engine itself. I mean, you could have as much as 200 horsepower with that if you had a big enough engine. But what I'm trying to get across is that the Flathead engine was absolutely just taken right out to the edge of the envelope. And I would say the only thing that really stopped it from being a true competitor against the overhead, the thing only had 3 mains. And the overhead valve with 5 mains, you could just get a lot more power into the crankshaft without having main troubles. But other than that, it was a fabulous engine. The block was a little heavy because there was a lot of cast iron, but you know, we would have later cast them in aluminum if that would have been the case. But that, I think the 3 mains is what actually caused the little Flathead to finally be retired, and the overhead valve engine. But it had a very illustrious life. A lot of people had a lot of fun with it, and including myself. The car I'm sitting in is Dick Kraft's Bug. This is the very first dragster in our sport. It was a roadster until Dick showed up at Santa Ana one Sunday afternoon with the body off, and they said, "You can't run, it's just a rail." Well, they still call them rails to this day. Now, this is a very primitive race car. If you look at the thing, it's a Model A chassis, it's got all original shocks, it's got a Model A steering bolted onto the side of the frame. But what is not primitive is the engine. Dick Kraft was a master at building the Flathead, and he came right off of El Mirage, Muroc, and the Salt Flats. And you'll notice his Flathead has got water transfer tubes. That was because his cars were for running distances longer than a quarter of a mile, and he realized the engines had to have cooling capacity. So you see how that carries right over into drag racing. Later they figured out, well, you don't need all that water, and they just filled the engines up with water. You'll notice some of the cars, they just have a radiator cap on the water outlet on the heads. But Kraft had the transfer tubes, but his engines were exotic, and he would run high speeds. This car ran 125 miles an hour in the quarter. Can you imagine setting out here, no roll bar, just out here in the open? And there's even pictures of Mr. Kraft riding this without a shirt on, just a set of goggles, no helmet, nothing. He did have a seat belt, and I'm not so sure I'd even wanted a seat belt. I think I'd want to be thrown clear from this baby if anything happened. And you know, that was the early philosophy in racing. You wanted to be thrown clear from the race car. That wasn't real smart, but believe it or not, that's what people thought. Now, in contrast to this primitive Bug, we go over to the Bean Bandit's car that ran 130s and 140 in the quarter mile, and you will see how these guys that ran, they were much later. When I say much later, only a couple of years, but in 2 years you would be unbelievable how the technology would change. And you'll see full belly pans and enclosed nose. They were concerned about streamlining. And at 140 miles an hour, who wouldn't be? You ever stuck your hand out of the window of your car at even 60 or 70 miles an hour? There's wind out there, and it's taking a powerful impact on what your car does. So you see the contrast here between the Bug and the Bean Bandit's car. It's very obvious. Both Flatheads, both very exotic Flatheads. Now, Kraft ran alcohol in the Bug, but the Bean Bandits ran 100% nitro. Now, you know, as we walk through this museum and we look at these beautiful cars, they all weren't like that originally. There are a few in here that maybe have never been restored, but a good portion of them came to the museum. They didn't look much better than this car, and some of them quite possibly looked worse. But we have a full restoration facility on the grounds where we take the cars down to the last bolt, take them all apart, start right out with the frame, repairing whatever damage might be there. It could be rust, it could be from an old ancient wreck. Repair all of that, then we go into the running gear. We go through every piece, the transmission, the rear end, the engine, all the components. And in the meantime, Alan Parker, the body man, is doing all the metal finishing, and he is really an expert at taking out the rusted and dented pieces and replacing them with good metal, hammer welding the new pieces in place. Then the car is all reassembled, all the doors and the trunks are hood and are fitted properly. And then the car is disassembled, painted, and then reassembled on the chassis. This is the way you get a really nice job, and restorations that we're quite proud of, and hopefully will last 40 or 50 years into the future, especially when the cars are stored in a facility like this where it's air conditioning and the humidity is held down and it's climatic control. You know, people who keep cars over a long period just in their garage beside their house without air conditioning be quite surprised to find that over 10 or 15 years quite a bit of deterioration take place. We've purchased cars that have been stored like that, and there's a lot of work to be done to them. So keep in mind, when you're walking through and you're seeing these beautiful cars, they weren't always that way.
Well, like Don mentioned, most of these cars that we get at the museum are pretty rough shape. They're rusted out or been repaired before and not up to our high standards. What we normally do is sandblast these vehicles, and this door right here didn't fit properly, so we had suspicion that it was not correct. So we sandblasted the door and found that somebody had repaired it once before and put these little patches in here. So we cut these out and made new metal and installed them with a welder, and we'll finish them off with a hammer, dolly, and filet, and very little Bondo, if any, but we usually metal finish everything here. Sometimes you might have to use just a little bit, but not much. And this door didn't align properly either. We had to readjust these door hinges and put larger door pins in the hinges. Now the door is starting to set properly. We also have more rust up in this area that we're going to get to shortly. We're going to cut this bad metal out and put new metal in there, reshape it, hammer, file, and so on. This is a 1934 Ford Cabriolet, which is a very rare car nowadays, and we thought it was worth saving. We're going to put it back in its original stock condition for the museum. I don't know what color yet we're going to paint it, but the top has to go on and fit properly. Everything has to be done before we paint this car. We have to install all the woodwork that's in the back that carries the top when it's folded down and so forth. And usually a car like this will take us 3, 4, 5 months to complete. And Don loves to get in there and do the mechanical work and all the wiring, and very fussy man. Everything we try to do is the best as possibly that could happen. And I always think about old Henry Ford up there smiling at us. When it really gets rough, I think about that, and I get a little smile on my face and just continue working, because it does get to be very hard work. But it won't be too much longer, and we'll get this one ready for the museum. He likes to drive them too before we put him in the museum, like he'll put 50 miles on it or something and take it out on a Friday night.
I certainly hope you folks have enjoyed the tour. I've enjoyed touring with you. You know, I come in here at night sometimes and spend 2 or 3 hours just walking around looking at them. It's really enjoyable. You know, one of the famous questions that I ask when people leave the museum is, do these cars run? They think they're all dead. Let me tell you, some of them are, but most of them run. And I'm here to tell you this little yellow Roadster is one of them. It's one of my pride and joys. I'll see you later.